Imagine you're trapped inside a city. Stone walls all around you. No escape. Outside, an army of 100,000 warriors surrounds every exit. They've been there for months. Food is running out. Water is scarce. People are starting to eat rats, leather, anything they can find. But then, the attacking army does something so horrifying, so unprecedented in the history of warfare, that it doesn't just destroy this one city. It kills 200 million people across 3 continents. 200 million. That's more deaths than World War I and World War II combined. And it all started with one decision, at one siege, that changed biological warfare forever. The year is 1346. The place is Kafa, a wealthy trading port on the Black Sea. And what's about to happen here is so terrifying that survivors called it the end of the world. Because the enemy didn't just want to conquer this city, they wanted to turn it into a weapon that would destroy half of civilization. And the most insane part? It worked. This is Janibeg. He's the Khan of the Golden Horde, one of the most powerful Mongol leaders in history. At just 34 years old, he commands an army that's conquered territory from Russia to Iran. His grandfather was a direct descendant of Genghis Khan himself. And boy, did he inherit that taste for absolute destruction. But here's the crucial part. Janibeg isn't just another brutal warlord. He's about to accidentally become history's first biological terrorist. See, while he's sitting outside these walls, plotting how to break this siege, a disease starts spreading through his camp. His soldiers are dying by the thousands. Black swellings appearing on their necks, their armpits, their groins. Blood pouring from their mouths. Death within days. And instead of retreating, instead of burning the bodies like any sane commander would do, Janibeg looks at these rotting corpses and sees opportunity. What he does next is so twisted, so unprecedented, that historians still debate whether he understood the catastrophic consequences. Welcome to the insane true story of the Siege of Kafa, and how one military decision killed more people than any weapon in human history. Now, to understand why Janibeg would even think of such a horrific tactic, you need to understand the world he was born into. See, Janibeg wasn't supposed to be Khan. Born in 1312, he was the second son of Özbeg Khan, ruler of the Golden Horde, that massive Mongol state that controlled most of Eastern Europe and Central Asia. His older brother, Tini Beg, was the heir. Janibeg was just the spare. And in Mongol culture, being the spare meant you either died young, or you got very, very good at survival. From age 5, Janibeg was taught the Mongol way of war. You have to understand, these weren't just warriors. They were a military machine that had conquered more territory than any empire in history. By age 7, Mongol children could shoot arrows from horseback at full gallop. By 12, they were leading raids. By 15, they were commanding units in battle. It was an early lesson for Janibeg that violence wasn't just a tool. It was the only language that mattered. His grandfather had once said, "The greatest happiness is to vanquish your enemies, to chase them before you, to rob them of their wealth." And young Janibeg absorbed every word. But here's what's really interesting though. Janibeg was different from his predecessors. While previous Mongol Khans were pure nomadic warriors, Janibeg grew up in a changing world. The Golden Horde was becoming more settled, more sophisticated. They controlled the Silk Road trade routes. They were dealing with Italian merchant republics like Genoa and Venice. Janibeg learned to speak multiple languages: Mongolian, Turkish, Persian, even some Italian. He studied not just warfare, but economics, diplomacy, manipulation. His tutors would later reflect that he had an unusual ability to see 3 moves ahead, like a chess player who could visualize the entire board. Now, if you're enjoying this insane historical story, hit that like button. It really helps me make more of these deep dives into history's craziest moments. The truth is, this combination, Mongol brutality mixed with calculated intelligence, would make him far more dangerous than any pure warrior. You see, Janibeg realized early on that fear was more powerful than any army. If you could make your enemies believe you were capable of anything, absolutely anything, they'd surrender without a fight. He watched his father, Özbeg, use this tactic brilliantly. Once, Özbeg had captured a rebellious city. Instead of just executing the leaders, he had them covered in honey and tied to stakes in the summer sun, letting insects slowly devour them while forcing the entire population to watch. The message was clear. Resistance meant not just death, but unimaginable suffering. No city rebelled against him again. In 1341, everything changed. Özbeg Khan died, and as expected, Janibeg's older brother, Janibeg, became Khan. But Janibeg had a problem. He was weak. Too interested in pleasure, not enough in power. Within months, the Golden Horde's enemies were testing boundaries, tribute payments were slowing, and the other Mongol princes were getting restless. Janibeg saw an opportunity here. Using connections he'd built over years, he started whispering in the right ears. Is this really the leader we need? Remember how strong we were under Özbeg. Janibeg is making us look weak. The genius of Janibeg's approach was that he never directly challenged his brother. Instead, he let others do it for him. When provincial governors complained about Janibeg's policies, Janibeg sympathized with them. When military commanders grumbled about lack of action, Janibeg agreed. In many ways, it was such an incredibly simple move, but it was the meticulous planning that made it possible. By 1342, less than a year after taking power, Janibeg found himself completely isolated. His own guards wouldn't look him in the eye. His general stopped following orders. And then, one night, Janibeg simply disappeared. Historical records are vague about what exactly happened, but suddenly, Janibeg was Khan. And anyone who asked too many questions about his brother also had a habit of disappearing. Now, at age 30, Janibeg had everything: an army of 200,000 warriors, control over trade routes worth millions in today's money, and territory stretching from Moscow to the Caspian Sea. But Janibeg saw opportunity for more. Much more. The Italian trading cities on the Black Sea, especially Kafa, controlled by Genoa, were making fortunes from trade between Europe and Asia. Every silk caravan, every spice shipment, every slave convoy that passed through paid massive taxes to these Italian merchants. Janibeg looked at Kafa's wealth and thought, why should foreigners get rich from Mongol territory? Little did anyone know, this greed would set in motion events that would kill 1/3 of Europe's population. Because Kafa wasn't just any city, it was the perfect breeding ground for disaster. A densely packed trading hub where merchants from Italy, Greece, Armenia, Turkey, Russia, and Mongolia all mingled together. Ships arrived daily from Constantinople, Alexandria, Venice. If you wanted to spread something across the known world, you literally couldn't design a better place. And in 1343, Janibeg gave his first ultimatum to Kafa: triple your tribute payments, or face destruction. The Genoese laughed at Janibeg's demands. Kafa had massive stone walls, 40 feet high and 10 feet thick. They had supplies to last years. They had the sea at their backs for resupply. And most importantly, they'd survived Mongol threats before. Let him come, they said. But here's the crucial part. What the Genoese didn't realize was that Janibeg wasn't planning a normal siege. See, the Mongols had been fighting for over a century, and they'd learned something important. Sometimes the best weapon isn't a catapult or a battering ram. Sometimes it's patience, and fear, and disease. In 1346, Janibeg arrived at Kafa with an army that chroniclers described as covering the earth like locusts. Contemporary accounts put the number at 100,000 warriors. Though modern historians think it was probably closer to 50,000, still absolutely massive for the time. They surrounded the city completely. No one in, no one out. Then they started building. Not just siege weapons, but an entire city of their own outside Kafa's walls. Houses, markets, even gardens. The message was clear. We're not going anywhere. For months, the siege continued normally. The Mongols would launch attacks, the Genoese would repel them. Arrows flew, Catapults launched stones. Soldiers died on both sides. But Kafa's walls held. The Genoese had fought off sieges before. They knew if they could just hold out long enough, the Mongols would eventually have to retreat. After all, keeping an army of tens of thousands fed and supplied was incredibly expensive and difficult. But then, something happened that changed everything. Disease started spreading through the Mongol camp. Not just any disease, this was something new, something horrifying. The symptoms were unlike anything anyone had seen. First came fever and chills. Then swellings appeared. Massive black pustules in the groin, neck and armpits, some as large as apples. Victims coughed blood. Their fingers and toes turned black as tissue dyed. The smell of rotting flesh filled the air, even while they were still alive. Most died within 3 to 5 days. Some lasted only hours. The Mongols called it the Great Mortality. The Genoese watching from the walls called it divine punishment on their enemies. We call it the Black Death, Yersinia pestis, the bubonic plague. Now, any normal commander would retreat. When disease strikes an army, standard practice since ancient times was to burn the infected bodies and withdraw. But remember what I said about Janibeg seeing 3 moves ahead? As he watched his soldiers die by the thousands, as the piles of corpses grew so high they blocked pathways through the camp, Janibeg had an idea so twisted that his own generals initially refused to carry it out. If disease was killing his army, why not share that death with his enemies? The order Janibeg gave next would echo through history as one of the most diabolical military tactics ever employed. And if you want more dark history stories like this, make sure you're subscribed with notifications on, because what I'm working on next is even more insane. He commanded his engineers to load the plague-infected corpses onto their catapults. Not stones, not fire. Dead, rotting, disease-ridden bodies. And then he gave the order that would kill millions. Launch them over the walls. The first corpse flew over Kafa's walls on a spring morning in 1347. Then another. Then dozens. Then hundreds. The Genoese defenders were horrified. Imagine it. You're standing on the walls, and suddenly corpses start raining from the sky. Bodies so decomposed they explode on impact, spreading gore and infected material everywhere. The smell alone was unbearable. But the real horror was what the defenders didn't understand. Each body was a biological weapon, carrying fleas infected with plague bacteria. The Genoese tried to dispose of the bodies quickly, throwing them into the sea, burning what they could. But it was too late. The damage was done. Within days, the first cases appeared inside Kafa. A merchant here, a soldier there. The same black swellings, the same bloody cough, the same agonizing death. But here's where Janibeg's plan worked even better than he could have imagined. The Genoese, terrified and desperate, made a fatal decision. Several merchant ships that had been trapped in Kafa's harbor decided to flee. In the chaos and panic, they slipped out at night, sailing for home. They thought they were escaping death. In reality, they were carrying it with them. The problem was, Janibeg had underestimated one crucial detail. Disease doesn't pick sides. As plague spread through Kafa, it also continued devastating his own army. Mongol soldiers were dying faster than they could burn the bodies. Entire units were wiped out in days. The mighty Golden Horde army, that had seemed invincible, was being destroyed by an enemy too small to see. Janibeg's generals begged him to retreat, warning that soon there wouldn't be enough healthy soldiers left to maintain the siege. But Janibeg, in his obsession with conquering Kafa, refused to leave. "Let them all die," he reportedly said, "as long as Kafa dies with them." But the plague didn't stop at killing soldiers. It started spreading to the Mongol supply lines, to nearby villages that provided food, to the messengers carrying orders between units. The entire infrastructure of the siege began collapsing. Horses died, leaving cavalry units immobilized. Craftsmen died, leaving siege weapons unrepaired. Cooks died, leaving surviving soldiers to fend for themselves. What had been a disciplined military machine turned into a diseased, chaotic nightmare. Then, in late 1347, Janibeg himself fell ill. The man who had weaponized disease was now its victim. Historical accounts describe him developing the telltale black swellings, the bloody cough, the rotting extremities. For 3 days, he lingered, probably delirious with fever, watching his great siege fall apart around him. His last recorded words were reportedly, "Kafa must fall." But Kafa didn't fall. Instead, Janibeg died in agony, killed by the very weapon he had unleashed. With their Khan dead and disease ravaging their ranks, the Mongol army finally retreated. They'd lost an estimated 85,000 soldiers, not to enemy swords or arrows, but to plague. The mighty Golden Horde limped away from Kafa's walls, leaving behind mountains of corpses and the lingering stench of death. The Genoese had survived, technically, but their victory was hollow. Because those merchant ships that had fled Kafa, they were about to spread hell across the known world. The first ship reached Constantinople within weeks. By the time it docked, most of the crew was already dead or dying. But it was too late. The plague had found a new city to devour. From Constantinople, it spread to Athens, to Cairo, to Venice. Another ship from Kafa reached Sicily. Within days, the port city of Messina was dying. From there, plague spread up the Italian peninsula like wildfire. By 1348, it had reached France, Spain, England. By 1349, Germany, Scandinavia, Eastern Europe. The Black Death, as it came to be known, would kill between 75 and 200 million people over the next decade. Entire villages were wiped out. Cities lost half their population. Some regions wouldn't recover their pre-plague population for 200 years. As for Janibeg's successor, his son Berdebek, he inherited a shattered empire. The Golden Horde never recovered from the losses at Kafa. Within a generation, it had fragmented into smaller khanates, its power broken forever. The great Mongol Empire, that had once made the world tremble, was ultimately destroyed not by armies or politics, but by the microscopic bacteria one of its leaders had tried to weaponize. Ultimately, though, the people who suffered most were the ordinary civilians across Europe, Asia, and North Africa, who had nothing to do with the siege. Entire families wiped out. Children orphaned, communities destroyed. The social fabric of medieval society completely unraveled. People abandoned sick family members. Priests refused to give last rites. Parents abandoned children who showed symptoms. The plague didn't just kill bodies. It killed the very idea of civilization for a while. What is clear is, this siege was an example of how biological warfare can spiral completely out of control. Janibeg thought he was just taking one city. Instead, he potentially triggered the most devastating pandemic in recorded history. Modern historians still debate whether the siege of Kafa was really the origin point of the Black Death in Europe. Some argue the plague would have spread anyway through trade routes. Others point out that the timing is too perfect to be coincidence. Plague appears in Kafa during the siege, then immediately spreads to every city those fleeing ships reached. But what's undeniable is that Janibeg's decision to weaponize disease was a turning point in military history. For the first time, we have documented evidence of biological warfare being used deliberately and systematically. Reports suggest that, towards the end, Janibeg had gone from a calculating strategic genius to a man consumed by obsession and hatred. The boy who had learned to see 3 moves ahead couldn't see that he was destroying his own empire along with his enemies. It's a pattern we see throughout history. Leaders who become so focused on victory that they lose sight of the consequences. The pursuit of absolute power leading to absolute destruction. What's really terrifying is that Janibeg's tactic, using disease as a weapon, didn't die with him. Throughout history, armies have poisoned wells, spread smallpox through infected blankets, and developed increasingly sophisticated biological weapons. The Geneva Protocol of 1925 banned biological warfare, but nations still research and stockpile these weapons today. In many ways, Janibeg opened a door that humanity has been trying to close ever since. The lesson from Kafa isn't just about medieval history. It's about the dangers of weapons that can't be controlled once unleashed. Now, whilst the story of Janibeg and the siege of Kafa is pretty terrifying, I still wouldn't call him the most evil leader in history. For that, you're going to want to check out the absolutely insane story of Tamerlane, a warlord so brutal he built actual pyramids from human skulls and killed 5% of the world's population. This guy makes Janibeg look merciful. The video is on screen now if you want to watch it next. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed learning about one of history's most catastrophic military decisions, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers!